This week on a podcast from beneath, Night of the Living Dead.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life, seeking human victims.
Mr. Poe, how's it going?
Doing great, man. Doing good. Ready to talk some zombies.
All right, and we have our guest back, William Hopkins. William, how you doing?
Hi, Carey. I'm doing well, thanks, and looking forward to talking about some of my favorite horror movies.
Yeah, these are definitely some of my favorites too. So my first question, William, for you is going to be, what did George Romero do for the independent film industry with this movie?
Well, from everything that we hear when we look at the retrospectives and tributes in books and magazines about Night of the Living Dead, he's almost credited with creating the low-budget indie horror business. Everybody who came after him seemed to be looking back at Night of the Living Dead's success to a certain extent. I mean, even when the subject matter wasn't similar, things like Halloween, for instance, obviously there's not much similarity in the subject matter, but the experience, I guess, was something that a lot of folks looked at and said, here's a bunch of guys out in, was it Pittsburgh, who are making a little low budget. They actually were experienced professionals. I mean, they had their own film company, so it wasn't as if they were coming, completely off the boat, but still a small little production. The budget was supposedly around $116,000. Romero says that actually the cash budget was about $60,000. So that's pretty cheap for a movie being shot in 35 millimeter. And there had been a lot of little indie horror movies before that. I mean, Carnival of Souls is a film that looks like George Romero had seen. There's certain similarities in terms of the zombies and in his films and the ghosts or whatever they're supposed to be. Those sort of spectral creatures in Carnival of Souls. And of course, the film that he specifically cited, which was The Last Man on Earth, which was the Vincent Price Italian adaptation of Richard Matheson's book, I Am Legend, which I guess now we're up with the Will Smith version. We got 3 different versions of that. I don't think any of them have really been successful. As a matter of fact, you could probably say Night of the Living Dead is the best version of I Am Legend that's been done.
Well, I think my favorite, if you if it's even considered, that would be, I think Omega Man is based off that too, right? With Charles.
It is.
That's probably one of the best ones, in my opinion.
That has a lot of pretty interesting and exciting stuff. It has a real 70s feel to it as well. So yeah, I've always liked that one. I actually saw that movie in the theaters when it came out, which is something unfortunately a person my age tends to say a lot.
Yeah.
Who was in it? Charlton Heston was in that one, right?
Charlton Heston, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And obviously, you can see how Last Man on Earth was at a little bit of a disadvantage because they went for Vincent Price, who was never, an action hero. He really isn't. Right? He does a good job, but
I love Vincent Price. Yeah. I love him,
but he's not really the right choice for that type of role.
No.
They're looking for an everyman type of guy, and he was never that. So, but it was an Italian production, and I guess they thought, well, here's an opportunity to get a American movie star, give it some box office appeal. And it's an interesting film, but I never really found it that successful. And I'm always surprised that George Romero gives so much credit to it, because he pretty much said that he copied Night of the Living Dead from that. And I don't know if that's because Richard Matheson had some things to say about that. Richard Matheson claimed that he had seen Night of the Living Dead on TV. He tuned in one night on his TV set and he saw Night of the Living Dead, and he thought they were running his movie, the Last Man on Earth, which seems a little excessive. And certain similarities, particularly at the point of egress, which is important in both films, the front door. That's where most of the action takes place with the zombies. But Last Man on Earth is a pretty old-fashioned type of film. There's none of the energy or the documentary style filmmaking that Romero was employing. And when I watched this, following up on your question, when I watched this the other night, that's the thing that really impressed me about it, is low budget indie film, what I guess in years past we would have called regional filmmaking, right? Small film being done in an area of the country that isn't known for filmmaking. And yet from a technical standpoint, it's pretty impressive, for a $116,000 movie. It's got a lot of impressive action scenes. The special effects are not state of the art in terms of what can be done now, but at the time they were pretty good, and that was true also of Dawn of the Dead. In terms of the filmmaking, he really was pretty impressive. So he was a big step forward, and I guess both of you guys have seen my film, Demon Resurrection. And I guess you can see the influence there.
And that was going to be one of my questions, because, and that's what's awesome about it. Watching your film and seeing, and not just your film, like anybody else's film, just seeing like what inspired these people. I mean, look, Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, Texas Chainsaw had a lot of influence on him when he was younger. Mm-hmm. So when he made his movie, that's what he saw in his head. He's like, I got to do something like this, which in his own right, awesome. I love that movie. Mm-hmm. That's one of my all-time favorites. But yeah, watching yours, I was going to ask, and it was probably a stupid question, because you can kind of see it. It's not like real obvious to me, but I was like, man, that's kind of cool. Being in a house, things are coming at you. That's, yeah.
Well, I thought, and it's funny that we're doing this right after the Hammer episode that we did a few weeks ago, because I always thought that Demon Resurrection ended up being sort of like one half The Devil Rides Out and one half Night of the Living Dead, because all the setup stuff is very similar to The Devil Rides Out. Even the appearance of Toth at the house is very similar to the scene where Mikado, or whatever his name is, Charles Gray's character, shows up at the house and tries to hypnotize the lady of the house into handing over the folks that he's after. That scene is sort of imitated in the scene where Toth shows up at the house. But at a certain point in Devil Rides Out, it begins to lose its way because they didn't have the budget to do the special effects that they wanted to do. So what I was thinking is, well, suppose when you get to that point where the shit starts to hit the fan, suppose you really have like Night of the Living Dead type action instead of the sort of mild stuff that they did in The Devil Rides Out, real violence and real menace. I mean, one of the things about Devil Rides Out that I always found funny was that, you guys know the film fairly well, right? Devil Rides Out. There's a scene where they've brought everybody in the house, all the people they're trying to protect, they're all in a circle, and they're going to fight off Mikado when he comes with his evil forces. And they let the kid upstairs. So they're counting on Mikado to be such a gentleman that he's not going to go upstairs and snatch their child. That seems, very English to me, very British.
Yeah.
And those are the sort of things we wanted to say. Let's have the setup, which really works well, but then let's go into some really visceral action. But Night of the Living Dead, of course, is fairly sustained visceral action all the way through. And one of the things that's really admirable about it is that, unlike Demon Resurrection, there's no trickery and there's no references to genre or anything like that. It's a very honest, straightforward film. There are no reversals. There's no instances where the filmmaker tries to get the audience to think he's going in one direction, then he goes in the other direction. It's all very straightforward, right?
That's what's cool about it.
I think
like that thing just comes for you. I think that's why it still resonates with people, because you start with the brother and sister, and the brother's giving her, the business or whatever.
Right.
And then it's just from there, they thought they were safe, and bam, it's like already, it's in your face.
And no pausing for explanation.
Yeah, no. Why is there a zombie? I don't know, but there he is.
And in a way, when you look at that film, you say, George Romero, whether he was doing it consciously or not, he seems to be breaking every rule that had been established in all the similar science fiction and horror movies that came before, because there's no instance where you get like the comic relief. You know, he started to get into comic relief a little bit in the later films. But in the first film, there's no comic relief,
No.
no bumbling character or anything, unless you consider the sheriff a slightly comical figure.
Yeah.
But it's almost like if somebody was doing a document of a real event, this is probably the way it would play out. And I like the idea that you have a bunch of people that are confronted with something that shouldn't be happening. I mean, by all rights, nothing like this should ever actually be able to happen. And yet it is happening right in front of them.
It also just takes place in one house.
Right.
Right, you could basically say one room, just if you had a living room. Was that the first movie to do that? Because I mean, obviously, movies after that have done it. Evil Dead takes place just in the cabin.
I mean, I wouldn't want to go so far as to say that there had never been a film that took place in one limited location, but I think I can say with certainty that there was never a horror film, never an American horror film, that took place all in one place. You know, the technique had always been, going back to Birth of a Nation, that what you do is you establish action in different places and then you cut between them. And the idea is you can build suspense, like in Birth of a Nation, which is a notorious film because of its racism. They have the evil black people attacking the white woman in one place and the Klan riding to the rescue, right? And they cut between the two. And that was something that actually D.W. Griffith apparently was the first to come up with, to build suspense, build tension. Are they going to get there in time to save? And Night of the Living Dead doesn't do anything like that. You never go anywhere else. All the other science fiction movies that came before, and in the 50s, there were a lot of science fiction movies. There was one called Creature with the Atom Brain, which actually has zombie-like creatures in it. But they do the thing that they always do. They find themselves a guy who's either a scientist or somebody in the military, and he becomes the honcho on the thing, even though very often you would think, you know, an invasion by giant insects or whatever would be handled by people on the top level. Somehow this guy, because he stumbles into the thing at the beginning, he manages to run the show for the whole movie. And along the way, there's a scientist, sort of an Einstein-like scientist, an old scientist, right, who has a beautiful daughter or possibly secretary, or both. She's his daughter and his secretary. And of course, there's a romantic interest with the military guy, the hero, right? And everybody's white. So there's no Asia. Every once in a while, they'll have an Asian Indian character, you know, in the picture, or they'll show stock footage of monster attacking in Asia or somewhere. Or, but for the most part, in all those films, it's always the same set of characters and the same style of storytelling.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like you're saying, the movies that came before this, like zombies, were actually like voodoo, like brainwashed people. They weren't like this was the first of its kind, where he had them actually.
Yeah, even in Plague of the Zombies, which was a Hammer film, that might have had some influence on Night of the Living Dead, because I'm sure. Yeah. Even there, they sort of are floating between the idea that the zombies are dead people, or if they're living people that are under some sort of spell. I mean, they refer to them as the Walking Dead, and at a certain point early in the movie, there are certain folks who are supposedly dead that come back or are later seen as zombies. But I haven't seen the film recently enough to be able to remember if they were actually implying that those people actually were dead, or if it just appeared that they were dead. And anyway, they always worked in the voodoo angle with all the previous zombie movies. So yeah, this was the first time that this type of zombie had been seen, and he didn't even refer to them as zombies.
No, they were just called ghouls in this movie.
And the original title was Night of the Flesh Eaters. And they had to change that because there had been a previous film just a few years earlier called The Flesh Eaters, which is actually kind of a fun film if you've never seen it. That's worth seeking out. I think that's in the public domain as well.
Oh, I gotta check that out.
Yeah. That involves Nazi scientists doing experiments.
Of course. Nazis.
Yes, the Nazis are always involved somehow. But yeah, I think that this was probably the first film where you had all of the action in one place and all of it pretty much in real time. The only thing that I can think of where they sort of break the real time feel a little bit is when they go to that brief scene with, what's his name? Tom and Judy, the young couple. They're off in another room talking about this is like the time when there was the big flood and we had we just had to buck up and try to get through it. That sort of little inspirational speech, which comes right before they get killed.
Yeah.
And when I was watching this the most recent time, I thought to myself, I'm a big fan of the 70s disaster movies. And that's a scene that could have come right out of any one of those disaster movies, because they always had that same ironic device of having the couple sort of huddling and saying, oh, we got to pull through this. I love you so much. You got to come, stick with me. We'll get through this. And then the next scene, they're falling out a window or drowning or whatever. So I guess that the idea is that to make it more impactful when they die, we get to know them a little bit and get to know what their aspirations are, which is solid, dramatic impulse. But in Night of the Living Dead, it's really shocking because even if you suspect that they may die, you don't expect they're going to get blown up in a truck and get eaten or torn apart by. That must have been really shocking for people when that film first came out.
Now, do you think that the one location and kind of doing like a linear story, do you think that was budgetary reasons or do you think that was creative?
Well, it probably was budgetary. I think probably they said, let's see if we can find one place where we can just put all our stuff and shoot the whole movie, which is sound reasoning for low budget filmmaking. But it's also true that, like in my film, the first thing that occurred to me to sort of stretch the soup was to have flashbacks, right? They don't do anything like that. Flashbacks kind of break the tension, And the reason why I did is because I really didn't want to achieve the same effect as Night of the Living Dead. It nods to Night of the Living Dead, but it's a different type of movie, really. But in Night of the Living Dead, if they had done something like that, it really would have damaged it. You really need to stay in the moment in that one place. And they do. I mean, the only vision that we have of the outside world, the only way we have of knowing that there's anything going on outside that little house is through the TV. And that makes it even more effective when we see those little snips on TV of the reporters talking. There's one scene where the reporter is talking to one of the scientists, and the scientist is describing how they cut the arms and legs off a cadaver, and it still came to life, and it's still moving around. And it's even more chilling because we're hearing it delivered as a news report. So if they tried to depict that in the film, it wouldn't be as effective because we would be viewing it as, well, that's a special effect,
Right, yeah.
Well, and you talking about that, I mean, the people they got for this film, I mean, some of these people were in broadcasting.
Yeah, right.
So it made it feel like, because I watched the documentary of, Night of the Living Dead, I forget what it's called, but I just watched it earlier. And George Romero was talking about it, and he just like, we just said, hey, cops, we need, a van or something. And he said people were just, hey, it's a film, right. And nothing like you said, nothing like that has been done. And all the monster films before that were gothic or giant ants or spider taking over. So, but that was awesome. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
When you look at that scene of the reporter first announcing what's going on, it's so chilling and it's so convincing that when I first saw the movie in the 80s on TV, when it was first broadcast late at night on a local TV station, and they put a little crayon at the bottom saying this is a dramatization, because the thing was so convincing they were afraid people would tune in. This is real.
They learned from what's his name?
Orson Welles.
Yeah, they learned from Orson Welles when he did the radio broadcast.
But I
think a lot of the at the bottom of the screen as he's talking, it's got the
right at the TV set.
Yeah,
right,
but they're showing like your closest emergency place. And I think those are
Oh,
actual
right.
places in Pittsburgh. Right? They're actual
Yes, yes.
counties in Pennsylvania. So that's probably why they had to put that on there.
Well, I think
Yeah.
Romero said that they intentionally put names of real places because they were hoping that would improve their box office chances in those territories. Because back then it was a common thing to take little low budget movies and shop them, go state to state, city to city with one print, run it for a week here and then move it to the next place. So I guess they figured if they could say this was actually something that refers to your town, that would bring people in a little bit. But it certainly adds to the realism of the scene too. And in Last Man on Earth, there's a TV thing too. There's actually 2 scenes where they have a TV reporter talking about what's going on, and it's completely fake. So it really is a great accomplishment on George Romero's part that he figured out the way to do those things is to get people who actually have some experience in broadcasting and let them do it. Let them write down what they would say in that situation, because anybody sitting who doesn't have experience doing that, anybody sitting typing up a script is never going to be able to capture the feel, the flavor of what a reporter sounds like when you're reporting an event like that. I think that's some of the most effective stuff in the movie.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
he
it
even
definitely
said that.
makes it
Oh, go ahead.
real.
Well, he even said like people in zombie makeup. He was like, "Go out, do what you want to do."
Yeah.
And they just did it. And he's like, "That was just amazing." Just let people do what they're going. Instead, him trying to say, "This is what you should do."
Well, it's
I thought
also
that was interesting.
It's also interesting that film, which was the first movie of this kind. So there really weren't a lot of movies in the past that had anything similar as far as zombies, and yet you see everybody seems to know what to do.
Yeah, it is weird to watch this film and then hear the behind the scenes that most of these people, one, did not know what the hell they were doing. You had some people that had, like you said, a little bit of knowledge of what they were doing with, filming. Like George Romero, he did I think it was like a commercial, a Calgon commercial.
Yeah,
and
they
he went
actually
out.
had a whole setup where they did commercials for beer companies and
Oh yeah,
detergent companies and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
and then he had some knowledge of what he was doing, but like everybody around him, you had a guy that was a producer, but then also he was an actor, and then you had a woman that was an actress, but she was also doing makeup. I think the couple, I can't remember their names in the movie, but it was the asshole dad.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Helen and Harry Cooper.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
They were actually the makeup people as well.
And he was one of the main investors. He was one of the sort of honchos on the film. Yeah. But the fact that folks seem to understand almost on a genetic level what effect they should be going for when they're playing the zombies, how it should feel, is remarkable. It also sort of points to maybe one of the shortcomings that George Romero has. I think he's a brilliant guy, and I think his greatest strength is writing and editing. But by his own admission, he wasn't really that keen on being a director. And he said in one of the interviews, I guess back in 2005, he did one of those documentaries, and he said that it was really a process of growing up for him to finally say, I'm a director and I have to make decisions. I have to be able to tell people, do it this way, don't do it that way. And that was really something didn't come to him easily. And I understand what he's talking about because it doesn't come to me easily either. It's much easier to say, well, let them do what they want to do, and then I'm going to be the guy that's editing it. I'll have the last word in post, right? But you end up with a lot of stuff that you have to fix in the editing rather than just getting it right when you're shooting it. So, and that might have also been one of the reasons why in Dawn of the Dead, there's so many sort of spotty things, like the blood being the wrong color and the makeup not really being outstanding. It could be simply that George Romero didn't want to make a fuss about it. He was content to say, okay, well, that's as good as we can do. Let's get on with it, and I'll try to fix it later. And that might be a shortcoming, and maybe also one of the reasons why he never moved into big budget studio films was because maybe he was perceived as being not strong-willed enough, not enough of a bastard. He was kind of a pushover, perhaps. He told a story about how when he was doing one of the later films that he actually did for a studio, I forget what it was called, well, anyway, they hired him to be the director, and they hired another fellow who apparently was very well established director of photography. And there was a scene where the characters are returning to a home that they haven't been in a long time, and the house should be dark, right? And the director of photography said, oh, if the lights are on, the picture will look nicer. So George Romero said, well, it would look nicer, but it wouldn't make any sense because these people are returning home to an empty house. The light shouldn't be on. So the DP got on the phone to the studio. The studio called Romero and said, do it his way. And Romero had no choice. So that was the sort of thing that if you have a reputation of being somebody that can easily be pushed, the studio folks take advantage of that. Somebody like Friedkin, I bet you any money they would never try that with him. Of course, on the other hand, Romero was really a beloved figure. I don't think there's anybody in horror filmmaking that has a better reputation as a human being than Romero. I've never heard a nasty thing said about him. And he, despite all his ups and downs, he was working right up to the end of his life. Whereas Friedkin has been reduced to doing documentaries about movies that he did 30, 40 years ago. Maybe being a successful director means being a bastard, but if you build up too many, a list of too many enemies, they're waiting for your downfall. And when you do fall, that's it, you're finished. Whereas Romero never had that because of all the people that worked with him. They all seemed to have nice things to say about him. He always could go back and do indie films if he wanted to. So, he didn't have that problem. And he left this world with a sterling reputation, not just as an innovative and important filmmaker, but also as a really good guy,
Let's go back to the zombies in this movie real quick, because
Okay.
what you had said about, I guess, everybody just kind of figuring out how to do it. And then the problem with people now with the fast running, the running zombies, people have a problem with that. The first zombie we're introduced to in this movie is not a slow zombie.
No.
That's right, yes.
It's pretty quick, and he also uses a tool. He picks up what was
a
it?
rock.
It looked like a table leg, and he's like trying to break the window, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he picks up a boulder at one point, or a big rock, and tries to break. I think that's what he manages to get through the window with. But yeah, there's and of course the little kid uses a trowel to dispatch mommy at the end of the movie.
Oh yeah.
So in Dawn of the Dead, in one of the news reporter interviews with a scientist, I think they have a line or two about how the zombies have been seen to have like rudimentary use of tools similar to what an animal, like a monkey might be able to do. But they didn't take it to the next step that they did in Day of the Dead. As far as the running and walking or stumbling thing, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, they could afford to have running zombies. In Night of the Living Dead, if the zombies were running, you would have been off the set, right? They had to stay in the location. Where were they going to run, right? I mean, the whole movie has to stay in this tight location. Also, I think there's something about the sort of implacable approach that makes it far more disturbing. If you're in a sort of 28 days later scenario where there's some sort of crazy creature is running at you and tearing your face off, well, it all happens before you have a chance to really think about it or feel anything, right? Whereas this, they're out there, and you actually could conceivably fight them off and get past them. If you don't, it's on you, which makes it even more humiliating, right? It's sort of like Blair Witch, where at the end of the movie, they end up back where they started from because they fucked up and they lost their way in the forest, right? Now, some people say, oh, that's terrible. That's lousy, stupid filmmaking, right? But actually it isn't. It's brilliant filmmaking. It's an observation about human beings. I would do the same thing.
Right.
I'd be wandering around in circles in the woods, right? That's another thing about Night of the Living Dead. It presents the characters as vulnerable human beings. And what happened from, to be honest, it happened from Dawn of the Dead on. Dawn of the Dead might be the first, where they said, they said, these characters have to be almost like action heroes, right? We have to suit them up with all sorts of weaponry. And of course, he was doing it in Dawn of the Dead. There was a satirical aspect to it. There was a social commentary aspect to it. And in the end, for all their efforts, it all still comes to nothing, right? But a lot of people looked at that and they said, oh yeah, horror movies from now on, they have to all be folks with machine guns and machetes. And that, to me, reduces the effectiveness of these films. People should be walking naked through this horror. They shouldn't have weapons. They should be completely vulnerable. That's what makes it horrifying. That's what makes it a horror movie rather than an action movie. When it becomes an action movie, you say to yourself, well, they're not really at any risk. At any risk, they got machine guns, they got machetes, they got hand grenades. What else do they need, right? And I suppose that's also the reason why you need running zombies. You need a more formidable enemy if you have all that weaponry, right?
I don't know. I
movies
would
that can
say
make it.
even with the slow moving zombies, if you get a crowd of them, I mean, they can, it kind of makes it hard to escape. I mean, we even in Dawn of the Dead, even in, the original Dawn of the Dead, a lot of them are getting taken down by just a swarm of them, even though they're just kind of stumbling around.
Well, yeah, and when I saw Dawn of the Dead, I saw that in the theaters when it came out, and I had nightmares after that. Not nightmares in the sense that I was in that exact situation, but I had nightmares that recalled that sense of you're in a group that's closing in on you, and you know that you should be able to get away, and yet you can't, And of course, in Dawn of the Dead, there's that the hubris that the guy is showing, that sort of exhilarated, almost manic energy that he starts to show. That's what leads to his downfall. If he had kept his head straight, he would have been able to move amongst those zombies and take care of them and get the trucks where they needed to be. And he wouldn't have ended up, I think he gets like twice in one instance.
Yeah.
He gets bitten, and then later, when they're wheeling him around in a cart, he gets his leg mushed up by another zombie. So that is the other thing. Don't get carried away. Don't get cocky, right? That's another message that we can learn from this. But I think these walking zombies, beyond being a production requirement because they were shooting in limited space, the shambling, shuffling zombies are just more menacing.
Do you think it would also have maybe to do with not enough stuntmen to do running gags, so they just figured we'll just have them?
Well, I don't know where they would run.
Or...
I mean, in a way, it's sort of, it reminds me of when we were doing Demon, and you're constantly coming up against this problem of you have your zombies and you have your heroes or your victims, and there's going to be a point where those folks have to interact. How do you do that? If the creatures are running, that really poses a real problem because you can't even set up a shot properly, right? I mean, how are you going to shoot that, right, with them running past? I mean, they can do it if you have, I guess they had a $40 million budget for the remake of Dawn of the Dead, 2040, something like that. But if you're doing a low budget film and you only have this narrow space to shoot in, somebody runs through, they're out of the shot before.
Right.
So I think that probably it's good for production reasons, and it's good for creating a feeling of dread and gloom and despair, that they're out there, they're not running, they're not an immediate threat, but it's almost like you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? When are they going to finally come through? And that's a much worse feeling. And it also gives you stuff to fill a 90-minute movie with, right?
Well, it's kind of like the slashers. They do the same thing,
right.
Well, not most of the popular slashers. They don't run after anybody. They just kind of, hey, I'm coming for you and I'm going to kill you. And we're seeing how they react, like, oh crap. And they're freaking out. They don't know where to, do I go upstairs, downstairs? Where do I, and
Michael Myers is always walking at a very casual pace.
Yeah,
he always seems to be right behind them. Right?
Just strolling. But that's what I like about those zombies in, Romero's film. The very first one. That's what I love about it. It's like these people have to work together. They might not like each other, whatever, but they got to work together to get out of this. And what's really messed up is they don't know how far it goes either. Right. You got your local news saying this and that, But they're just clueless as anybody else, and it's just them in this house surrounded by dead people that want to eat them.
They have no idea if they escape, if there's any place to escape to.
All right.
And they're making all sorts of incorrect assumptions, right? They're forcing themselves into these false, false choices. Say, do we go down to the basement or do we stay up here? Well, it doesn't need to be one or the other, right? You can stay up here until things get out of hand, then you can go down to the basement. But because of the tension that exists in the people, the people want to force it, right? The Harry Cooper guy, he wants to be the boss, and Ben wants to be the boss. Neither one of them is right. And because they both want to dominate, everybody ends up dying, really. Right? I mean, at the end of the movie, when Harry tries to get the gun away from Ben and Ben takes the opportunity to shoot him, probably not the smartest thing to do, right? You're one of two men, living men, in a house that's surrounded by zombies, and you're going to shoot the only other living man, right? I mean, they've already, in the context of the film, we have to assume that the women are not good for anything, right? I mean, Romero said later that he regretted the way the women were treated, but actually it was a pretty good reflection of the attitude that existed at the time. And there's actually a line in the film when the young guy is talking about, their plans, and he says, that just leaves the three of us, right? Just the three guys. That's only the three guys. Are the only ones.
Yeah. There ain't no one else here.
Nobody else here. And people might say that's a flaw on the part of the filmmaker. I don't think so. That's a reflection of the time. That's the way people thought at that time. Barbara's reaction, first of all, I think Barbara's reaction is entirely natural and human. I have a feeling that I'd probably be in a similar state if I was in that situation. So the idea is, they're showing women become incontinent when they're confronted by danger. No, they're showing that any normal, sane human being goes a little crazy when they see dead people walking up the lawn, eating or attempting to eat them. That's the sort of thing that brings out the worst in everybody, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not really a question of it being a flawed, representation of women. It's a human being, a vulnerable human being. And actually the other female characters, they're competent as they're allowed to be. I mean, I guess the young woman that goes running out to the truck, she didn't turn out to be any great help to anybody, but she didn't turn out to be any great help to herself either, right?
Right.
So,
But I guess Tom Savini kind of flipped that around when he done his remake.
Oh, yeah.
And he had the Barbara character being a little bit more of a powerful character.
Right. I have never seen the remake, but I'm aware that, I know George Romero said that was something that they both felt was important to change that. And of course, in Romero's sequels, you have important women characters in Dawn and in Day. In Day of the Dead, the woman is the hero or the lead character of the film. I personally, I think that's great that he was aware of that. Certainly you could make the women more capable. And in the case of Dawn, you're removed by several days. We don't know how much time has passed since this zombie outbreak has begun. So you would assume everybody's gotten their shit together. Everybody who's still surviving will pull themselves together emotionally, and they would be behaving and more rationally and be more competent. So that character and all the people in that group have that advantage, that this isn't just being sprung on them for the first time. In the first film, though, this is all happening out of the blue. Nobody even knows, it's not like somebody said, now the zombie apocalypse has started. It's this complete mystery as to what's going on, right? When she's attacked in the cemetery, she doesn't even recognize the guy as a zombie. He comes walking right up to her.
Yeah.
She says later she was going to apologize to him because the other guy, her brother, her husband, I guess, who was it? Was
it was her brother.
No, it was
the
her
brother, right? Yeah. He was making, doing the Boris Karloff voice and all that, which is kind of a funny thing in a way, that you start a movie that is so fresh and original in its approach to horror, and you have a character right at the beginning doing this sort of callback to the old spooky voice type
Yeah.
characters you used to see in old movies, So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, see, I like the characters in this one because they were real. They weren't SWAT team members or
Right.
anything like that. And I think for as little as it was, I think they kind of had a better, more time, like the growth of character, I guess, up
Yeah.
until they meet their demise.
Mhm.
But do you think that, because every time I watch it, I just assume that um, this group of people that he has in the house, especially with our two main characters, I'll say, Cooper
Mhm.
and Ben. Do you
Mhm.
think that has anything to do with like the racism at the time?
Well, Romero claimed not,
He
but
always claims
Romero,
that about
yeah,
all his movies there that he didn't do
Yeah.
he
anything.
made a lot of
Yeah.
claims that he was a very nice guy and he was a very good interviewer or interviewee. He had a lot of interesting things to say, but I think he felt that it made them look a little better if they weren't sort of going for that, because right around that time, I guess it was just a few years earlier that Sidney Poitier became a big star.
Yeah.
In the Heat of the Night, and in the same year he did In the Heat of the Night, he also did Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Both of them were big box office hits.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Heat of the Night, of course, there's that famous scene where the white guy slaps him and he slaps the guy right back. And the director of that film, I forget who it was. Wasn't Arthur Penn? I forget. Anyway, he said that he used to go to the theaters with Sidney Poitier, and they'd stand in the back of the room and wait for that scene to see how the audience reacted. And if it was a white audience, it would be like stunned silence. And of course, if it was a black audience, it'd be like,
They're
oh,
like,
right, yeah,
hell
right
yeah,
on.
slap that cracker. Yeah, I mean that is a good scene, but yeah, you're right.
And then you have in this film, you have him punching even more severe. He
Mm-hmm.
punches the woman, knocks her out. So it doesn't have the same effect really, because we don't see her as a menace or a threat to him. But just the fact that you had a black man as the hero of the film, and he's interacting with white characters without anybody making any acknowledgement of the racial difference. And when nobody's saying, well, you're just a black guy, you should shut up and do what you're told.
Yeah.
That is shocking in itself. And the fact that filmmakers would be ballsy enough to risk their chances at nationwide distribution by putting a black character in the lead, because that was still a very dangerous thing to do back then if you were concerned about your commercial success. I mean, right around that time, roughly around that time, some of the southern stations were saying they weren't going to broadcast Star Trek because it had a black character in it, right? And she wasn't even the star,
Yeah.
she was the one that she operated the switchboard, and they still were saying, "Well, we don't want to see this." So it was a ballsy thing to do, and I think maybe he feels that it makes him look even better, frankly, if he said, "Oh no, it was just sort of a natural thing for us. We never thought of race." And I'm not trying to suggest that he was insincere, but I think it actually, to me, it's a greater sign of the courage that they had in doing the film and the attempt to be honest, to make a film that really didn't have any tricks or, shenanigans like a lot of other movies where you get the feeling that the director knows more, like the Hitchcock approach, where the director knows more than he's allowing the audience to know. And when you look at the previous shocking film, the one that came out in, what was it, 62 or thereabouts, 65, which was Psycho. And Psycho really is one big long trick on the audience, right? He's constantly hiding information from the audience that would allow you to understand what's actually going on, because he's saving it all for the end of the film. In Night of the Living Dead, there's none of that. It's completely straightforward and completely honest. So that sort of honest filmmaking also includes having a black character in the lead.
I think that's the way the way I've always taken it every time I watch it is, you got Harry Cooper, and he's got his family to this house. He's going to protect them, And then you have the black man that's going to come in and he doesn't want to, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, you're not going to come in and take over. And
Mhm.
that's just the way I've always took it, that there was that tension.
Right.
And of course, when, Ben shoots him at the end, that was just kind of his like, I'm just going to kill you because you were racist. You know what I'm saying? That sort of thing. Like, no, I know you
Well,
said that was probably like the bad idea, but it was
well,
that hatred had taken over.
yeah, I mean, it's
No, yeah,
understated.
like no matter what's going on and no matter how many zombies are out here, like two human beings can't get along,
Right.
right? I mean, the downfall of
Yeah.
civilization is because
Well, that's also
trapped in a house and we still can't do anything
right
civil to try to survive. We're just going to kill each other.
because they came. They talk about how the zombies are operating on instinct. Everything they do is instinctive. Well, that's true with the people too. Right?
Right.
They come into this situation with a whole bunch of stuff, baggage of how they should behave with other people. And even though it's not stated, and I think it probably was wise not to state it. Romero said that Dwayne Jones, the guy who played the character, thought that it would be a good idea to at least acknowledge the racial difference. And they decided not to do that. I think they were right. I think it plays much better if you allow that to be an undercurrent rather than to
Right.
being a stated thing, because you're right. It is kind of, and the Coopers, they don't own the house either. None of the
Right,
people
yeah.
there own the house, but they're still acting like it's my show and
Yeah.
you're just so. But he does turn out to be correct to a certain extent in the end. They probably would have been better to go down to the basement.
To the
close
basement,
door.
yeah. That's what I've heard other people argue, that who was actually right, and everybody wants to say that Harry was right because as it's going down, you think, well, you don't want to be trapped. You know what I'm saying? You don't want that to be your.
Yeah.
There's only
Well,
one way in, one way out, and if all the zombies get to that basement door, you got nowhere else to go. If you at
well,
least go to the attic, you got windows you can jump out of.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's true, and that's the case that he makes, right? At least you can escape if you need to, and you keep an eye on what's going on. But there's a reason why fallout shelters have only one door, right? It's because once you get the people down there, you want it to seal it in like a tomb. If you have multiple doors, then that's multiple possible places of exposure, because doors can be opened. And it's not as if you can't hear what's going on, because Ben actually manages, in his cross-examination of the Harry character, he actually establishes that, yes, they heard them when they were up there, right?
Yeah.
First he says, oh, we didn't know what was going on. And then he says that they heard him tearing up the place. So clearly you can hear what's going on. And at the end of the film, when Ben is down in the basement, he can hear the shots of the approaching posse. So it's not as if you'd be completely cut off. But my feeling would be, if you put all your stuff down there and you seal that one door off completely, so there's no chance of anybody getting through, then what would it matter if you did miss the posse, right?
Right.
Eventually, some other posse is going to come along. Something's going to happen eventually. Put in a provision of food to last you and stay down there as long as possible. Because there is one other problem. You already got a zombie down in the basement.
Right.
She's
Yeah.
just waiting.
Which I
to
guess
pop
they didn't
up.
know at the time. They didn't know at the time because
They didn't know
been
that.
established that a bite
Right.
would turn you into a
Right.
zombie also.
Right. But they do suspect. I mean, he does say, we don't know what the germs from those things might do to you, right? And anybody in a situation like that would sort of suspect that if the dead are returning to life, you have somebody who's near death, well, if they die, they're going to return to life too. And all the news broadcasts are saying that the radiation levels continue to increase, meaning, and they actually say this I listened very carefully to the radio and the TV broadcast to get all the extra stuff that normally I didn't pay much attention to the first time. But they actually do repeatedly talk about the radiation from this satellite that's returned.
Mm-hmm.
So he is giving us some understanding of one possible explanation for why these creatures are returning to life. And as the movie goes on, you hear more reports saying, like I say, the scientists say the radiation level is continuing to increase. So they're not out of the woods. Things are going to get worse. Sort of reminds me of some of the broadcasts that we've been hearing recently during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's no good news on the horizon. So
yeah, like I said before we started recording, I figured we could definitely make some parallels between Night of the Living Dead and what's currently going on with the coronavirus.
Well, the thing that strikes me is that at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead, where they have that very shocking scene where the SWAT team goes into the housing project because the people in the housing project have been saving their corpses, the dead people. And the whole idea there is that those people are defying the government. The government says you have to bring your dead out, and they have to be burned or taken away. And they're saying, no, we're going to hang on to it. We don't believe the government. We don't, hang on to our cherished dead and give them a decent send-off, which doesn't turn out too well for them. And that sort of reminds me of what you hear now with all these silly people arguing about, they have a right to walk around without a mask, or they have a right to be in crowds or have big crowds over to their home. It's a civil rights issue. It's my right to do this. And I mean, I'm surprised that we're even debating this, because I would think that history would tell us that in emergency situations, your rights are diminished a little bit. We all have to accept limits to our rights when the security of the nation is at stake.
Right.
During the world wars, nobody would say, well, we're going to do as we please. We don't care that the Nazis are attacking or whatever. And that wouldn't be accepted, wouldn't be considered acceptable. So somehow there's been a politicization of this whole thing, so that people can actually work themselves around to believing, first of all, that it's some sort of insidious attack by the Chinese, but at the same time saying, but we're not going to do anything to protect ourselves or our fellow Americans from it. What sort of crazy logic is that? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, I don't really get it either. But it's a bunch of country of Harrys.
Well, actually, when he gets to Day of the Dead, which is really my least favorite of the three films, to be honest, I think that one of the reasons why I dislike it is because you have those sort of stereotypical, the macho military redneck guys. In the first film, nobody calls Ben the N-word, right? There's no acknowledgement. In the third film, every other word out of their mouths is slur. And it's all delivered at such a frenzied level, like they're just frothing at the mouth practically, that it really is over the top. And it is exactly the contrary of what you were talking about with Night of the Living Dead, where you can really see yourself in those people. You can imagine yourself in that situation. Whereas in the third film, that's like some sort of comic book. It doesn't have any connection to reality at all. Even with the mad scientist going around with blood smeared all over his body. And anybody say, hey, you're coming into here to sit down to eat, and you got the blood from the corpses you're cutting up smeared all over you? What the fuck are you doing, man? Right? That's how people get infected, right? You're going to come in here like that?
Yeah.
And nobody says that to him because he's kooky.
Yeah.
He's an eccentric. And the other guy who's the head of the troop, who I don't know where he got his lessons in leadership from, but the idea that you would tell your subordinate, I'm going to shoot you unless you shoot the only woman that we know is still alive on the planet, right? That's his demonstration of how loyal he is to his men, right? I'll shoot you if you don't shoot her. And what is he interested anyway? I couldn't understand what was everybody trying to do? I mean, I can understand the Night of the Living Dead, they're trying to survive. And in the Dawn of the Dead, they're trying to create some sort of little bubble for themselves where they can, sort of get past the shit that's going on in the world and have a reasonably normal life, right? They're sort of rebuilding society in the mall. But in the third film, I can't understand what motivated anybody.
Well, because this will lead into that question. Do you take the first three films as sequels, like they're all in the same timeline?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think that they're groups of characters at different points in the within the first few days of the outbreak, then with Dawn, presumably within the first few weeks, maybe, and then when you get to Day, maybe it's months or maybe even years. I don't know if it's explicitly stated how long it's been, but it all, because the rules stay the same, right? The rules for how to destroy the zombies, the type of zombie. You could say that the the one element of continuity throughout the three films is the zombie characters, right? They don't change that much. Their makeup became a little more elaborate, which I don't know if is necessarily such a good thing. I know that they were trying to do stuff with prosthesis, and that was becoming a popular thing around then, possibly because of Michael Jackson's Thriller. I don't remember if that came out before or after Day of the Dead, but they started doing that thing with putting, the pronounced ridges around the eyes and buck protruding teeth. I guess the idea was the faces were shrinking,
Right.
shriveling, so all those things would stand out. But the problem is anytime you put stuff on the face of a living person, it's going to be further out than,
Right,
it's
yeah.
going to make them look even bigger. So it always looked to me like they were doing some sort of low budget version of Planet of the Apes. And those don't look like corpses to me. And I think that the zombies in the first film were probably the most effective.
Right.
They weren't doing
Oh,
anything.
yeah.
They're just people that had died and come back to life. But I suppose they could also make the argument as well, if this is some time later, all these corpses would be rotting, so that you need more makeup, right? They need to look different than just somebody who's recently risen from the dead. But then that raises another problem with the whole, and this is one of the reasons why sequels to something like this may be problematic to begin with. The reason why the first film is successful is because this is not something that is possible. You're forcing characters to confront something which we know cannot possibly happen, right? There can't be any sort of virus or radiation that can cause a corpse to get up and start walking around, because bodies get up and walk around because there are organs inside them that are functioning, right? They have circulation, they're able to breathe, they have to take in food, so they have energy to power it all. So it's not like some mysterious radiation can be like the puppet master and all these people pop up and start moving around. It's just not physically possible, and certainly isn't possible when many of these people have open wounds, missing limbs, or their entrails hanging out. Or, that would mean that their bodily systems would not be able to function. So even if the radiation revived them, they would die again because they wouldn't be able to function, right? So when you get to the third film and some of these zombies appear to be largely decomposed, well, does that make sense? That a thing can be living and also being rotting? So that's the other thing about the third film that I think is a problem, is that they begin to tackle the scientific questions a little too much. You shouldn't go into the science, right? Because it's a dead end. There's no way you can rationally explain something that can't happen. So the best thing to do is to stay away from that. Stay with people who aren't scientists. So the whole thing is just some sort of nightmare that they have to deal with, right?
See, I've always thought that part 3 was, again, I kind of figured out if they were in the same timeline, but then I thought maybe they're all just taking place at the same time, but in different areas. So you're kind of seeing it
Well,
different
that's
areas.
possible.
But I think part 3, I think it's well years after the first one,
It
and you've
feels
gotten
like.
down to like there's hardly anybody left, or there's still like a decent amount of people left, and the U.S. government wants to try to weaponize the zombies, and that's why they're in that base. Because
Oh,
they're going to
possible.
start. They're probably getting in wars with other countries because everything's breaking down.
Well, that's an
That's why
interesting.
that's why I think they're there. But of course, they're in Florida, which we know the first one's in Pittsburgh. This
Right.
one's obviously in Florida, and when they're out in the city, there's like nobody left. So it's definitely, a long time since the first movie.
Well, the idea that the military may be trying to weaponize the zombies, that's an interesting idea. If that's the plan, then they sure picked a bunch of bozos to head up the operation. They say something in it. They have a long scene, and there's a lot of long dialogue scenes in the film, which I think is an indication that they didn't have as much money as they had planned. And I think Romero said something to that effect when the film came out, that he had more elaborate stuff planned, and the money didn't come through. And so they had to basically fill the film out with a lot of lengthy dialogue scenes, like when she's with the Jamaican guy in their little oasis, and he's going over the records and showing her how all this stuff, I guess it's supposed to be like a salt mine where all important records are being stored and things like that. So if it's a military operation, I guess that's suggested by that platform. That looks like something that you would use to lift missiles or rocket
Just to have,
launchers.
yeah, have equipment to have equipment out of there, I guess.
But then later he says it's a place where they store important records and things. So I don't know what it is meant to be. It doesn't really look like much of a military base inside. I mean, it's like a bunch of big rooms with brick walls or cement block walls. So yeah, if they were planning to use the zombies for that purpose, they probably should have, put a little more effort behind, a little more money and a little more effort. But well, Dawn is probably, I think if I was going to pick between the three films, I think Dawn is probably the best film overall because it's really an exhilarating experience. It runs the whole gamut of emotions. The first film is a very dark, shocking movie, and it ends on a very shocking downbeat, right? It's the ending is still effective when you see that pyre at the very end go up and you hear that final note on the soundtrack. And that's where they leave you, right? That's pretty grim. Dawn of the Dead is a whole bunch of emotions. It's shocking stuff at the beginning, and then it becomes kind of fun and exhilarating in the middle. And I still, whenever I get to that part where the woman, they're trying to figure out how they're going to get around in the mall, and the woman looks over at the car and says, "Well, why don't you use the car?" Holy shit, that really is brilliant, right? They looked around the mall and they said, "What can we use here to make this film more exciting?" So why didn't he drive the car around? And it's great. It's just thrilling to watch. And all those little set pieces when they're putting their little kingdom together, that stuff is just so inventive and so well edited. And the use of music is another thing I don't like about the third one. I don't care for the score at all. It seems
the Goblin soundtrack on Dawn is it's great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that is absolutely the perfect. And all the little choices, because he uses a lot of little library music cues in Dawn as well, but they're very well chosen. And he always picks music that is ideal for the scene. And some scenes are made much better by the choice of music, like that scene where they're in the ammo shop and they're going through all the guns and everything, and there's like a tribal beat playing on it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were suggesting that that's coming over the music, or if that's just music he thought this works so well, I got to use it. But it does. It makes that scene. That scene would be dead without that music. And of course, that plunky mall music. Any other movie, any other horror movie that tried to use music like that, it would destroy it. Right?
Oh yeah,
it would be ridiculous. But in this movie, it's perfect. Right? It's just so right for those scenes. So yeah, I think I just was thrilled watching it again. The first time I watched it in years, I thought it was just terrific, And the special effects problems don't bother me because, that's that's not really why I'm coming to watch that movie, is to see what color the blood is. Right. Although it is kind of unfortunate, because I don't believe the stories that George Romero tells when he says that, he wanted it to be phony looking because he's Mr. EC Comics. He didn't want it to be too gory. That's the same guy that said that they shot the first movie in black and white because he thought that the black blood looked more horrifying, more gory than the phony stage blood that was usually used in movies. So he was aware of that problem, that the blood didn't look right in color movies. What they needed is to have a guy like Dick Smith, coming in with his own special formula. As I think he's the guy that came up with the blood that's used most frequently, or similar formula. Darker. He did Taxi Driver and a whole bunch of movies, The Exorcist and a whole bunch of movies. But he's the guy that came up with the formula that looks like real blood. I just wonder if he had used more realistic blood in Dawn of the Dead, if it would even be watchable.
I don't know. I kind of like it. I think it. Maybe it's just growing on me. I've always enjoyed that brighter, red blood. I don't know. It makes it stand out more.
Yeah, in a way, maybe it makes the movie easier to enjoy because it's not so horrifying. I mean,
Right.
some of the gore scenes in Day of the Dead, it's kind of hard to watch, when people's guts falling out and stuff like that. It's just not pleasant. It's not fun, And that's the real objection I have to Day of the Dead. It's not really a fun movie.
Right.
It's kind of grim and,
What do you think about the blood, Mr. Poe?
Sorry, I had to mute the mic. I had some stuff going on back.
The zombies are approaching.
No, yeah, I wish. It's dogs barking.
Oh.
Anyway, no, I agree with you. I mean, the blood doesn't look great, or some of the effects in that movie. I mean, I guess that usually does happen. You make something that's just so grand the first time around, and you come with another movie, and usually it just doesn't work out the sophomore effort.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I mean, it's just weird. I always talk about that. You had the first Saw that was just spectacular, and then now we got 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So I mean, with Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead always will be a classic, and I do enjoy the remake as well. But I always go back to I always show people that hadn't seen it, so you need to check this out, because that is pretty much, hey, he invented this, and that's why we have The Walking Dead, and that's why we have everything to do with zombies.
Oh.
He set the bar so high, and the funny thing to me is he didn't even mean to.
Right.
It's just like,
accidental.
we don't know if we're going to finish this thing or not, and they do, and it just becomes this enormous freaking thing.
Well, you guys are both younger than me by quite a bit, I imagine. When you saw, I assume when first time you saw Night of the Living Dead, the zombie genre had been pretty well established, and there were a lot of other zombie movies that have been done, including the ones by Romero, right?
Well, I mean, I guess so, right, Carey? Because I mean, I'm going to say, like, in high school, they had. I mean, you heard of Night of the Living Dead, but I think like Part 3 had already come out. Return of the Living Dead Part 3. I mean, it wasn't as big as it is now. I don't know. What do you think, Carey?
Well, what was your?
I'm a special case because I actually seen Dawn of the Dead as a kid before I seen Night of the Living Dead.
Oh,
So I've been watching them for years. So
yeah.
yeah, Dawn of the Dead was my introduction to the zombie, and I saw it, when I was a kid on Betamax.
How did it affect on Betamax? Wow, that's really good. How did that affect your enjoyment or your appreciation of the first film?
I don't believe it did really. I think I can, even after when I seen Night of the Living Dead after that, I still enjoyed it.
Did it seem like a shocking movie though, or did it just seem like a pretty good horror movie?
I think it was just, I don't think it shocked me as much as it probably did everybody else at seeing Night of the Living Dead the first time.
Yeah, I think that to be one in that audience that saw this on the big screen back in '68, that must have been just. I mean, you've heard these stories about that Roger Ebert wrote the article in Reader's Digest about how he saw it. It was being run as a kiddie matinee. Did you hear this story?
No, I'm interested.
Apparently, the distributors weren't too discriminating about how they booked the film. So they put it on a double bill with a sort of old-fashioned Gothic horror, maybe one of the Poe movies or something like that. And it was a children's matinee, and they showed Night of the Living Dead. And that's the show that Roger Ebert attended, and he wrote this article afterwards saying how horrifying it was, and that children were running terrified from the theater, and traumatized them for life. And he later acknowledged that it was a good film, but at the time, I guess he couldn't resist being the protector of the youth of America. Funny thing is, just before I signed on to this meeting, I checked online and I saw that one of the reviews that comes up for Night of the Living Dead is from Common Sense Media, which is this organization that tells parents what movies they shouldn't let their children see. For some reason, Google gives them equal time with Wikipedia and the IMDb, so their thing pops up, and they're still talking about how, essentially it's irresponsible for you to let your child see this.
I don't know that. I mean,
Well,
See,
nowadays with
yeah, go ahead, go
the
ahead.
internet, there's a lot more worse things kids
I,
now can watch besides Night
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Living Dead.
I tried, I tried when my oldest son, when he was little, I kept him away from, violent stuff. I tried. Okay.
Right.
And he's, he went to a friend's house. He was playing Grand Theft Auto, and all that. And I was like, holy crap, you try to protect him from that. But some of the video games, I mean, you've seen some of this stuff. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
These movies back in the day, the classics that we like don't hold a candle to playing a video game where you can rip someone's head off. It's just like, how are you gonna talk about Night of the Living Dead, a classic in its own right? And I think it's worth anybody watching. It's not that gory. It's
No.
I don't know.
Well, and actually video games may have a worse effect on children because it's actually interactive.
Yeah, you're
drama,
playing the
just
guy to
watching.
rip someone apart. But I'm just saying, yeah, how are you going to be so against a movie like that? And then you got The Walking Dead, #1 TV show,
Well,
and it's 10 times worse. I mean, it's not worse, but you know what I mean, graphic
Graphically,
wise.
it's worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always mystified by that myself. I think it has something to do with budget, to be honest. People seem to be perfectly willing to watch big budget Hollywood stuff that has all sorts of explicit material in it. But if it's a low budget film, it's like, how dare you? And I
Yeah.
know from my own experience with Demon Resurrection, which isn't, it has a certain amount of explicit stuff in it, but it certainly isn't, way out on the extreme. And I have some folks that stopped talking to me after that movie.
Golly.
And these same people I know, they never missed an episode of The Sopranos.
Oh, geez. Oh, man.
And I know
First 2 seasons of The Sopranos was the most violent shit you ever seen.
you always, even for somebody like myself, I didn't regularly watch the show, but I heard certainly about the things, the atrocities
yeah.
that are being committed. And I thought to myself, these same people that object to my silly little movie, they're sitting every night, probably with their kids,
Right. Yeah.
watching The Sopranos, and they don't think there's anything wrong with it. Or The Walking Dead, for that matter, which to me may be more troubling because Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, there are 3 films over the course of 10 years. Walking Dead is on every week, right?
Right. Yeah.
Still, yeah.
100 hours of Walking Dead that you could watch if you wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And that might, I don't want to go too far, but that may have been, the success of that show may have been responsible for the popularization of this sort of survivalist mentality that we see now, where everybody's storing up their guns and they're, getting ready for the end of the world. That attitude that's evident in those shows that, you got to be prepared for the end of the world. You have to figure out, which is also something, and this is true for Dawn of the Dead as well. People who are kind of insecure and who have mental problems, they really take to these movies because they like the idea of being in a world where all your problems can be solved just by shooting the other person in the head.
Right.
The joke could be, here's a guy who can't get a date for the prom, can't get a job, doesn't know how he's going to pay for his car, but he's got a gun or a club that he can use to fight off zombies if there's a zombie apocalypse. Everybody likes the idea of a problem that they know the way to handle, right? And it doesn't have, you can immediately get rid of all the sort of problems that come with social anxiety, but not knowing how to behave. That sometimes is the biggest problem. In a zombie apocalypse, we're all equalized immediately. We're all on the same level, and we all can do whatever we want to the zombies, right? Everything is fair game in order to stay alive. So that to a person who perhaps is struggling with emotional problems, this is a very attractive. And I have to admit, when I saw Dawn of the Dead for the first time, I went around in a fantasy land for quite a while afterwards, hearing that goblin music playing in my head. I remember Dick Cavett talking to Brian De Palma, and I think it was Martin Scorsese. And he was saying how when he comes out of those guys' movies, everything looks different. You know, the world looks different. And it's true. Those movies get you into a different frame of mind.
Yeah, they do. They're very, very good directors, both of those guys.
Yeah. And De Palma is a similar director to Romero in that it's very aggressive, you know, heavily edited, very carefully planned out, a lot of action, a lot of shock stuff. And that can put you in the same sort of apocalyptic frame of mind that some of Stephen King's books do. You know, there was a kind of a thing for a while there when Stephen King was first popular. Every time there was any kind of sort of gruesome accident or murder or anything like that, the news reporters would always note when the victim died, she was holding a copy of a Stephen King book.
God,
as if somehow that would, you know, means, see, Stephen King, once again.
He struck again.
But when you read those books, especially if you read them one after the other, you know, when he became popular, all his back books were available. And if you read one, you said, oh, I like that. You go back and you could probably spend a couple of months reading all his back books. And you're in that constant state of mind that he puts you in, where you're always in danger, right? The world is always teetering on the brink. He did a lot of apocalyptic stuff too, like The Stand and
the Dome, or
The Dome, yeah. And what was the one that he did? Firestarter.
Yeah,
and,
Firestarter.
And talk about one location films, Cujo. The whole thing is in a car.
Oh my God, that is just that movie's fantastic.
And what was the other one he did with? What was the movie that was done with Christopher Walken?
Dead Zone.
Dead Zone.
Dead Zone.
That is a badass movie.
Yeah, and it has that sort of apocalyptic feel to it as well. You know.
Well, he even compared.
You got the scissor scene in that movie.
That was pretty hard.
He compared that character that Martin Sheen plays. He goes, I see that character in, you know, well, now not President Trump, but he saw that same, you know what I mean? He saw that same thing. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I kind of can see that, you know, but
I can see Trump hiding behind a kid if he's getting shot at.
I think Trump keeps a bunch of kids around. Just to...
but yeah, I mean, seeing that film, and then, you know, that's just weird. Yeah, when he pointed that out, I was like, that is kind of crazy.
Well, it's funny because that is kind of like a stock character that you see in books and movies of the past, the sort of demagogue that rises to a position of power, who's a little crazy, you know, or a lot crazy. And the funny thing is that even with that character being out there, being, you know, a pretty, you know, recognized thing, Donald Trump went right ahead and lived up to that character, that prediction in every way. Right? He didn't stop and say, well, I won't behave this way because people are going to think I'm like that guy in that movie. He went right ahead. I'm just as crazy as anybody. Right? So he fulfilled everybody's prediction. Everybody who wrote about a character like that in any book in the past 50 years could say, see, I saw him coming.
All right, so George Romero films this movie, edits it, throws it in the can. Him and Russ Streiner get in the car to start taking it around everywhere, and he forgot to get it copyrighted. Right? Is that the right term? Copyright?
Well, they actually
Trademark.
had the copyright. No, it was copyright.
Copyright. Okay.
They had actually gotten the copyright. The question was the notice. The copyright law up to 1976 said that you had to have a notice of copyright on the film itself. And if you look at movies prior to 1976, you'll notice that TV movies and feature films, when the title card comes up, they'll have right underneath copyright 19, and they usually have it in Roman numerals, the year the film was copyrighted. They called it Night of the Flesh Eaters. They took it to a different distributors. Nobody was interested, possibly because of the racial aspect, because Martin Luther King had just been killed right around that time. They eventually found Walter Reed Organization was willing to distribute it. Walter Reed said, well, we can't call it Night of the Flesh Eaters because there's a movie called The Flesh Eaters that was just a few years old. So they changed the title. And when they did the new title card, they left out the copyright notice. And that put the film immediately into the public domain. What's surprising to me is that with all the changes that have been made to the copyright laws in the years past, nobody's thought to say, if a film has accidentally fallen into the public domain through some misadventure like this that wasn't your fault, there should be some way to recover the copyright. They did it with It's a Wonderful Life. That was in the public domain for a long time, for decades. And they eventually managed to recover the copyright, but it turns out they recovered the copyright on the original source material and on the music. They never lost the copyright on those things. So they were able to assert control or ownership of the movie on the basis of the copyright for those components of the film. And this is similar to what you see with old Bugs Bunny and Superman cartoons.
Mhm.
I don't know if are you familiar with the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons from the
Yeah.
40s?
Mhm.
Those went into the public domain. All of the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons went into the public domain because the studios just didn't bother to renew the copyright. That was another thing you had to do. And in the years after, when VHS got started, you would often see public domain video cassettes of those cartoons. And the only thing they had to make sure of is that they didn't come up with original artwork using those characters, because the characters were still trademarks of, or copyrighted material of, it might have been both actually, of Warner Brothers and whoever. So they had to use frames from the actual film to illustrate the film on the cover art. Otherwise, they'd be in violation of other things, right? The ownership of the characters was never in question. So it's all very tricky stuff, and George Romero really got screwed. But in a sense, you could say it was a tremendous boon for them. Because the film was in the public domain, everybody could show it. Everybody could put out video cassettes. And in time, a film that might have been forgotten became a big, big thing, right? It was remembered because everybody had access to it. In the same way, It's a Wonderful Life probably would never have been remembered, except that every Christmas season, every local channel would play it 3 or 4 times.
Yep.
So we were sort of forced to make that part of our tradition of holiday viewing. You know?
So you think that by not doing that and losing, I guess, the rights to it and having anybody be able to put it, or having more people be able to put it out, do you think that that helped him out, or do you think you don't think he lost a lot of money?
Well, he did lose a lot of money, apparently.
Right.
So he said that they made on a $100,000, $115,000 movie, they made $700,000 just in the first year. How much of that came to him, I don't know. Because when your distributor realizes that your film is in the public domain, how fast are they to give you your part of the money, right?
Yeah, they probably don't move too quick.
Right, probably not. What it made in the years after is probably phenomenal. I don't even know if there's some way to calculate it, because they got so many people selling it in so many different places, including that, was it Good Times?
Hollywood Classics.
Hollywood Classics, right?
Yeah.
Which is a label that only exists to put out movies that have fallen into the public domain.
Right.
Wow.
And of course, anybody can remake the movie, right? That doesn't.
Apparently.
That's not a problem either. With the
They had this terribly embarrassing business. See, this is another thing where I say George Romero was really a nice guy, because there was a lot of legal wrangling after Night of the Living Dead with his partners on the film, John Russo and some of the other people, about who could do sequels and what name they were allowed to use. And after all the fussing died down, they went back to being cordial and friendly. They didn't do movies together anymore, but it wasn't as if they all became bitter enemies. And Russo went off and started the Return of the Living Dead series, and Romero was given the right to continue the Dead movies.
right.
So Russo got the Living Dead and Romero got the Dead. But I don't think there's anybody that thinks that any of the other people involved with the production are anywhere near as talented as George Romero. You know, he was a uniquely intelligent and talented fellow. So, I mean, Russo lucked out because that Return of the Living Dead ended up being rewritten and directed by Dan O'Bannon.
I think whenever Russell was going to do it, he wanted to do a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And when Dan O'Bannon came on board, he didn't want to step on George's toes like that. So he was like, I'm going to change it. Of course, they changed the name. He made it a comedy, added
Right.
the, the
Well, good for
talking
him.
zombies and all that. So I think that's, well, yeah, I mean, again, like Return of the Living Dead's probably one of my other favorites. That's like the perfect movie right there, script wise and
Right.
story wise. It's great.
And that whole strain of sort of comedy zombie movies, which I guess would also include one of my favorites, Reanimator.
Mm-hmm.
That those films owe a lot to Night, and I guess Dawn as well, because Return of the Living Dead came out in the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Dawn was out by 79, so that had some comedic elements. For the first time, you start to introduce lighter stuff, and in a way, you could say that whole business with the motorcycle gang at the end of Dawn, where they're actually going to the extreme of breaking out pies to throw in the zombie's face. That's sort of like Romero saying, we took this as far as we can, and now we're going to just, have a little fun with it on the way out. And I guess, I don't know if he expected to do another. I don't know if he even wanted to do another. But unfortunately, the level of characterization of those motorcyclists is pretty much all we get in Day of the Dead, right? We get stuck with all those stupid guys, for a whole movie, which isn't really very entertaining. At least Dawn has some pretty intelligent and civilized people that we can spend our time with for most of the movie. We don't have to hang out with the motorcycle guys. And he really portrays them as awful dummies. I mean, the one guy who actually can't resist putting his arm in the blood pressure.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the definition of stupidity, right? But, and when you get to the third film, you get more of that. And that's, a little bit is fine, but a whole movie of that is more than I can take.
Right. Yeah.
I also think, not to pile on Day of the Dead too much, but it's also true that as Savini's technique improved and he was trying more ambitious things, they got to more absurd violence, like a group of zombies being able to pull a man's head off his body while he's still screaming, or the other guy gets the bottom part of his body pulled off, just like they're pulling down his pants. It comes off so easy.
Yeah.
That's not, first of all, we've already established that the zombies are barely standing upright, and yet they somehow have the ability, without any sort of tools or weapons, to pull
you apart. Yeah.
I always wondered, like, by the time you get to Day of the Dead, it's like, how are they even strong enough to even tear through flesh with their teeth, But I guess it's a movie, I'm saying, I'm not gonna.
They're all in that cave.
Yeah.
Presumably they don't have any food, so you would think they'd be in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
But apparently not.
I guess that's what makes it fun, though.
I guess so, yeah. Well, he by that time, maybe he was actively saying, I want this to be like an EC comic. So maybe he was going to those extremes, even though he knew that wasn't really realistic action. Maybe that's the way he justified it. So people shouldn't get upset because obviously something like this is impossible.
Right, yeah.
But it diminishes it a little bit for me.
So, Mr. Poe, what are your final thoughts on Night of the Living Dead?
My final thoughts, I think it was all said through this episode. I love revisiting these things. I love talking about, the behind the scenes stuff that got this awesome movie made. I just want to say more people need to go back in the catalog and check stuff out and see where this originated from. But yeah, I love this film. I love this one. The remake is also really well done. Sit there and have a zombie night and watch these awesome films.
Put you in a perfect mood during the pandemic.
Yeah.
There you go. Just don't look out the window if it's really happening. No.
William, final thoughts?
Well, maybe one of the positive aspects of zombie movies is that when you get out of them, if they're well done and they really affect you, when you get out of them, come out of the theater at the end, all of your problems suddenly seem manageable in comparison to what you've seen. So,
yeah, true.
Well, times may be hard, but at least I don't have flesh-eating zombies walking up the lawn trying to get in the window. So, you know, that's one very therapeutic aspect of it. I noticed that when the pandemic started, there were a couple of news articles about studies that had shown that people who like violent horror movies or apocalyptic movies were better prepared to deal with the pandemic. So we could see watching these movies as sort of training for
Yeah.
the coming apocalypse, if we're not already in the apocalypse.
All right, yeah.
But I love these films, like Aaron and yourself. I've always been a great fan. Seeing the first one on TV, you would think the effect would be diminished, but it was absolutely extraordinary to me when I saw it. And when I saw Dawn of the Dead in the theater, to me, that was like going through a war. I mean, I never had experienced anything as intense and as exhilarating as that film. The combination of emotions was what was so impressive to me. And of course, when I went to see Day of the Dead in the theater, I was doubly disappointed because it didn't quite reach, you know, that level. But no movie really could, I don't think. You know,
No.
that's sort of like lightning in the bottle. You're not going to do that twice. And he didn't do it. I mean, he did another 3 or 4 films, right? Zombie films.
Yeah,
then-
I believe so.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it, but
Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. I think.
Survival.
Oh yeah, you're right. Survival of the Dead. Yeah.
and I can't bring myself to watch them because I have a feeling I'm going to be disappointed. Have you guys seen them?
Oh yeah, I've seen all of them. I think
Land
Land-
of the Dead.
Land of the Dead was good. It was decent. I think that was. I think he always wanted to do something like that,
Mhm.
but just the popularity fell off. And then when the
Mhm.
remake of Dawn of the Dead came out and
Right.
kind of got those movies back spotlight, I think then studios were like, okay, let's see what he can do, and he done Land of the Dead. I think it's good. I think it's a good one.
Well, Universal put out the remake of Dawn of the Dead. Right?
Yeah.
And they also put out Land of the Dead. And there's a part of me that hopes, I don't know if this is true, that George Romero said to them, I won't give you any trouble with the remake of Dawn of the Dead. I'll say nice things about it.
Yeah.
You got to let me make my fucking movie
let me
with the
make
time.
my-
Yeah.
the last one.
And
Plus,
they did.
it's got Dennis Hopper in it. You can't go wrong with
That's a plus.
yeah.
Dennis Hopper. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
recommend watching the Survival of the Dead. I think wasn't all that great. They
I
kind
don't think I've
of
seen
fall
that
off,
one.
but
No.
There was one that he did on was almost a found footage type thing.
that's
That Survival.
that was Diary of the Dead.
Diary.
Diary,
Yeah.
okay.
Diary
Yeah.
of the Living.
But
Dead.
it kind of goes back to the beginning because you're there when it all starts again, like when everything starts breaking down, like
Oh, cool.
the first zombie attack.
Well, that's a good idea because my feeling is always with these type of stories, the closer you get to the initial outbreak is where the story is.
Yeah,
The farther you get away from the initial, it's just like the Frankenstein and Dracula movies. The farther you get away from the original thing, the less effective it's going to be.
but again, and it's just like, I mean, I know he's always said he doesn't purposely put, Dawn of the Dead's not about consumerism and all that,
Mhm.
but Diary of the Dead takes place with everybody filming on their phones and everybody's got a camera. So I mean, it's like purposely, that's what's happening today. So that's what he's putting
Yeah.
in the movies.
He didn't want to look pretentious.
Right, yeah.
But
And I
I think
definitely
it makes sense.
recommend that you check out the remake that Tom Savini done of Night. I think he done a really good job with it.
He did. It was good.
I think that the one thing about Day of the Dead, one final shot that I'll take at it, is that as he went along, he seemed to be moving further away from his sort of personal style of filmmaking to a more conventional type of filmmaking. The stories, even the fact that he had a sort of conventional or traditional score playing over everything, rather than his library cues, which he had used so well in the first 2 films. He was moving towards being more of a Hollywood director. He never really went all that way, but he made an effort at it. And I think when it comes to something like the Dead movies, that's not a good match. You don't want big budget, glossy, Living Dead movies.
Right.
At least I don't.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, whenever I watched those movies and then compared to his other movies that he done that weren't, the Creep Show movies, and he definitely had a different style outside of the zombie movies when he made other movies.
Oh yeah. Well, Martin is certainly a very unusual.
Crazies.
Crazies. And Crazy is a very influential film too. I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind recently, which is a film that I think very highly of. If you guys haven't seen it recently, get the Blu-ray and get it up on a big screen. It's very impressive.
I need to revisit that one.
But there's a big chunk of that movie that sure looks like the Crazies. All that business about the town that's been, they're faking an anthrax outbreak, and they're getting a lot of that stuff is very similar to stuff that happens in the Crazies. I'm pretty sure, I don't want to say it's plagiarism. It's not plagiarism. It's just being influenced or inspired.
Well, that was because Close Encounters was what, 70, 79?
Yeah, it's much later than because Jaws was 76, so Close Encounters must have been Close Encounters was after Star Wars, which is 77, so it would have been 78, 79.
Yeah, and then the Crazies was, I don't remember what year the Crazies came
That
out.
was mid 70s, I believe.
Yeah,
Okay.
72, 74. Or something.
So it could have been. He could have been influenced by.
Sure looks like it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
I'm
nothing
sure
wrong with that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of movies if you watch, you could be like, oh, that's a throwback to an old Romero film.
There's something like where you can tell when you watch a film and you're like, oh, okay, I can see where they got their inspiration.
Right.
Then there's overdoing it, which some movies you see, you're like, okay, I get it. You like that,
Right. Well, Romero said that himself, that, he's a little discouraged to see all these low budget movies that were zombie movies that were, aping his stuff. Like, why don't you do your own thing, guys?
Yeah.
And so many of the filmmakers, this is something I always was annoyed by. They work in these little jokes, like they'll have some characters named Romero or something like that. It's like, isn't that clever?
Yeah.
So you saw that movie too.
Yeah.
When Spielberg and Lucas did that, like working C-3PO into the hieroglyphics on the walls and Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was not really an inside joke. Everybody in the fucking world knew who R2-D2 and C-3PO were. So it's a joke we could all appreciate. But a filmmaker who's ripping off somebody's work and then tips their hat by naming one of the characters, giving them the same name as the director they're ripping off, that's not really a tribute as far as I can see. And it must have pissed Romero to think all of these things that were done, including The Walking Dead and World War Z and all that stuff, millions of dollars being spent on these things, and he's not getting anything. All they say is, oh yes, it's an homage to the great Romero.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's kind of homage,
Yeah.
I think it was in one of the Simpsons commentary. They were saying how homage is just a French word for stealing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's close to the truth.
Yeah. All right. So, William, where can everybody find you and your stuff on the internet?
Well, we have a channel that we're posting these videos on YouTube, which is actually getting a fair amount of attention. That's William Hopkins Films, or William Hopkins Films on, it's a YouTube channel, so it's youtube.com/William Hopkins Films. And all the videos that we've done here are available there on that channel.
And you've done a great job with them.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone
Fantastic.
was, when I started seeing the clips of the films pop up, I was like, that's awesome. And then of course you had the top secret scene, and I was like,
You would be amazed how many copyright notices I got 5 minutes after the video went up.
My God.
Yeah. Well, the
You
good thing with this one, you won't get any off.
That's right. Thank goodness you.
We can throw the whole movie on here.
Well, let's do it. Well, anyway, it's they're getting the videos are getting a good response, and so that's one place where they can be seen, and also they can be seen obviously in your usual podcast place, Podbean.
Right.
And I'm on Twitter, William Hopkins on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, and Demon Resurrection is on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm all over the place. So.
And you get the movie still available on Amazon, right?
Demon Resurrection is still available on Amazon, and there's still some copies of the old DVD if anybody's interested in that old relic. So Amazon and eBay.
And you're still working on Sleepless Nights, right?
That's right. Yes. Hopefully sometime before I die, that will be finished. It's hard to redo a film. It was hard enough doing it the first time.
Yeah.
Doing it all over again but that's Sleepless Nights. It's a vampire movie, and that'll be coming out in
Awesome.
2021, hopefully.
Okay. And
Very
Mr. Poe.
cool. They call me Mr. Poe on Instagram, Twitter, and the Slasher app. And of course, I'm part of the B Movie TV crew over there. Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Sci-Fi Sideshow. And check us out on William's YouTube account. I really enjoy the videos too, my friend. I mean, fantastic job, and
Thanks.
I can't thank you enough for that. That's awesome. So,
Well, I thank you for having me on this show. It's been a great,
yeah.
great experience, especially during the pandemic when everybody's stuck inside, to be able to,
I can't wait for conventions to start up again. I really miss going to those. I hope sometime soon that happens, where we can go out again.
The next big convention will be a doozy altogether with the pent up demand, and
Oh man,
it's going to be a lot of people eager to get out and
yeah,
to do their cosplay.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, well, you can find me on Twitter at 1313 Of course, the show is on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We got some groups and pages on there. Of course, you can find the show on any of the major podcasting platforms, pretty much all of them right now. I think we're on. The next thing I'm trying to get on right now is, I think Sirius XM just launched their podcasting thing. So,
oh, they did.
Yeah, maybe we can get on there. But if
That'd
not,
be
you can find us everywhere else. And until next week, everybody, thanks for listening, and we will continue to watch the good, the bad, and the cheaply made.